Hey dudes, we're going to talk about an unknown writer named Regis Sprocket who's selling books on Amazon for 99 cents. He's written books about Ukraine and California and music and 70s and 80s culture. He wrote a horror screenplay and some poetry too. Now, these books are really interesting. They're essentially unknown, but really interesting books if you have an interest in Ukraine, what it was like before the war, and if you have an interest in Southern California culture in the 1980s and music history, you get some 1970s progressive rock history. If you're a guitarist, traveler, interested in European culture, maybe if you're a Gen X, I think these books are good for the Generation X people. So, let me talk about one of his books. First, The Loners, which was set in the 1980s in a Southern California high school. And it talks about what was happening then, the music, the culture, life as a teenager in Southern California at that time of history. And if you're a guitarist, he's talking about this guitar virtuoso kid that was playing everything from Hendrix to Zepp to Andres Segovia, classical guitar. So there's a big chapter on this teenage guitar player too. And it talks about relations between men and women, or young men and women back then in the 1980s in California. Pretty cool book. And another one of his books is The Odessa Smiles, which is set in the city of Odessa in Ukraine on the Black Sea. And it's set in the years leading up to the war. And it's about an middle-aged American man that goes to live in Ukraine and what he encounters there. It's a pretty spicy story, and it's very evocative and atmospheric, so you feel like you're actually in the city of Odessa, Ukraine. It's critical in some ways of some of the corruption there, some of the scams, but I think, mostly it's the Russian mafia down there that causes all the problems in Ukraine. His other book is Awkward Abroad. It's about a teacher who in the 1990s goes to Europe on his first European adventure. He's taking a sabbatical. He's taking a leave from work. He's sort of burnt out on teaching, and he goes to Europe for the first time, and it's a really funny book. And he's a pretty innocent, naive American from the Midwest, and he's traveling in Europe trying to find adventure and maybe romance. And he's pretty clumsy. He stumbles across the fields and castle walls and cobblestone streets of Europe, making a lot of mistakes and learning a lot about life in general as an American tourist. Another book he wrote is The Verde Cove Ghost, which is sort of like a screenplay for a typical 1970s or late 1960s European B movie, one of those cult movies that that you can find on the internet nowadays. Really great music and interesting plots and titles. So this particular story is set actually in California. It's about these college students who party in a haunted house. And it's just a great story you can visualize. It's more like reading a short story or a novella, like a small novel than it is reading a screenplay because it's very atmospheric. It has a good description of the scenes and stuff, and it's an